The fake driver's escape was seconds away, until the police quietly surrounded his SUV. A billionaire was only seconds away from stepping into a black SUV when an 11-year-old black boy shouted 4 words that stopped him cold. "That's not your driver, sir." At first, nobody listened. Hotel staff thought the boy was causing trouble. Some assumed he was looking for money, but the child refused to back down. What he knew would uncover a shocking chain of events involving a missing driver, a vanished mother, a powerful investor, and a secret plan that could have changed lives forever. The most unbelievable part? The one person who saw the truth before anyone else wasn't a security expert, a police officer, or a billionaire. It was a poor boy standing at a bus stop who simply chose to speak up. And what happened after that would change his life forever. The bus stop on South Halsted Street had a roof that leaked when the rain came hard and rattled when the wind came off Lake Michigan. That morning, the rain had already passed, leaving the pavement dark and shining, the gutters full of slow brown water, and the air smelling like wet concrete, bus fumes, and coffee from the corner deli. Malik Carter stood under the shelter with his old backpack pressed against his chest. He was 11 years old, small for his age, with careful eyes and a Navy school sweater that had been washed so many times the color had faded at the elbows. His gray pants were a little too short, showing the white edge of his socks above his sneakers. His mother had pressed those pants the night before with a towel over them, because their iron sometimes burned clothes if it got too hot. Across the street, the Langford Grand Hotel rose over the block like something from another world. Its front doors were glass and brass. Its windows caught the morning light and threw it back in pieces of gold. Men in dark suits walked in and out with phones pressed to their ears. Women in long coats stepped over puddles without looking down. A doorman in white gloves stood beneath the awning, opening doors for people who never had to wait for buses. Malik knew that building, not because he belonged there. He knew it because his mother sometimes worked in the kitchen behind it when the charity meal program needed extra hands. He knew the alley where the delivery trucks came in. He knew which side door smelled like bleach and bread. He knew the old church down the block where the soup line formed on cold nights. He knew the back streets of that rich building the way some people knew the front. And he knew Mr. Benson. That was why he was still standing there. He had missed the 7:42 bus. Then he had let the 7:55 pass, too. His school was 4 miles away, and if he was late again, Mrs. Donnelly would call his mother. But Malik could not make his feet move. His hands stayed locked around the strap of his backpack. His eyes stayed on the black SUV waiting in front of the hotel. It looked right. That was the problem. It was the same kind of SUV that came for Edward Langford every Wednesday morning. Black paint polished so bright it reflected the hotel lights. Dark windows, silver trim, a small flag pin clipped near the front license plate. The engine hummed softly at the curb, sending little clouds of steam into the damp air. But the man behind the wheel was wrong. Malik had seen Mr. Benson hundreds of times. Mr. Benson was older, with gray hair at the sides and a slow way of moving because his left knee bothered him in the cold. He always opened the rear passenger door first, then reached for the briefcase second. He always tapped twice on the steering wheel before pulling away. And on his right hand, between his thumb and wrist, there was a pale scar shaped almost like a crooked letter C. This driver kept both hands low. He did not tap the wheel. He did not look toward the hotel doors. He just sat there, too still, with his cap pulled low and his face turned slightly away, like a man trying to be part of the car instead of a man waiting to drive it. Malik swallowed. He thought about walking away. He thought about school. He thought about his mother's tired voice telling him, "Baby, sometimes staying out of trouble is the smartest thing you can do," but then he thought about what she always said after that. And sometimes, Doing right means trouble finds you anyway. The hotel doors opened. Edward Langford stepped out beneath the awning. Even from across the street, Malik recognized him. Everyone did. Edward Langford was the kind of man whose picture appeared on hospital walls, newspaper articles, and charity banners. Tall, white-haired at the temples, wearing a charcoal suit that looked too clean for a wet Chicago morning. A leather folder was tucked under one arm. In his other hand, he held a paper cup of coffee. Two hotel employees walked behind him. One carried a tablet. Another kept talking quickly, probably reminding him of places to be and people to call. Edward listened without really listening, his eyes already moving toward the SUV. The driver finally moved. He reached back and pushed the rear door open from inside. That was wrong, too. Mr. Benson never made Edward open or close anything. He got out, always, even in snow, even in rain. Even when his knee hurt so badly, Malik had once seen him pause and breathe before walking around the car. Edward was 3 steps from the open door when Malik's voice came out. It did not come out loud. It did not carry across the whole street. But it carried far enough. "That's not your driver, sir." Edward stopped. For one strange second, everything seemed to stop with him. The steam from his coffee rose in a thin white line. A taxi rolled past and splashed through a puddle. The doorman's hand froze on the brass handle. Malik could hear the click of a traffic light changing above the intersection. Edward turned his head slowly. His eyes found Malik under the bus shelter. The hotel manager heard it too. A sharp-faced man with slick hair and a dark coat stepped forward from near the entrance. His name tag caught the light. "Carl." "Hey," Carl snapped, crossing toward the curb. "You. Back away from the hotel entrance." Malik stayed where he was. Edward's brow tightened, not angry yet, but alert. "What did you say?" Edward asked. Malik's throat went dry. Cars moved between them. A bus groaned past, blocking his view for a moment, its windows fogged with tired faces heading downtown. When it cleared, the SUV was still there. The open rear door waited like a mouth. Malik stepped off the curb, then stopped as a bike messenger shot past. "I said that's not your driver, sir." Carl let out a hard little laugh, the kind adults used when they wanted other adults to know a child was not important. "Mr. Langford." "I'm sorry. These kids hang around the stop all morning. Some of them make up stories to get tips from guests." Malik felt the words hit him in the chest. These kids. Not this boy. Not this child. These kids, like he was part of something dirty stuck to the block. "I'm not asking for money," Malik said. Carl turned his head, his smile gone. "Then move along." Edward did not move along. He looked toward the SUV, then back at Malik. The driver was still facing forward. That bothered Edward. Malik saw it happen. The tiny pause. The way the billionaire's hand tightened around the coffee cup. The way his shoulders shifted. Not much, but enough. Edward Langford had started to notice what Malik had noticed. "Why do you say that?" Edward asked. Carl stepped between them slightly. "Sir, your schedule." Edward raised one hand. Carl went quiet, but his face tightened. Malik looked at Edward. He knew how this usually went. Rich people did not listen to boys like him. Police officers told him not to loiter. Store clerks watched his hands. Women clutched purses when he and his friends walked by after school. Even when he tried to help, grown-ups often saw trouble before they saw him. But Edward was still standing there. So Malik forced himself to speak. "Your real driver is Mr. Benson," he said. "He's older. He walks with a little limp. He has a scar on his right hand. He always opens the door from outside. And he always gives me peppermint candies if he sees me waiting for my mom. Carl scoffed. That could be from watching the hotel. Malik's cheeks burned. I do watch, he said quietly. Because my mom works around here. Because sometimes I have to wait. Because when you don't have a car, you learn everybody else's. Edward's expression changed then. Not much, but enough to make Malik keep going. That man in the car is younger. He keeps looking in the mirror. He didn't get out. And Mr. Benson wouldn't let your door sit open like that in the cold. The morning air pressed around them. A woman with a suitcase slowed to stare. A delivery driver stopped stacking crates near the curb. One of the hotel valets whispered something to another valet, and both of them looked at Malik the way people look at a match dropped near gasoline. Edward turned toward the SUV again. The driver's face remained angled away. His cap shadowed his eyes. One hand rested on the steering wheel. The other was lower, hidden near the center console. "Patrick!" Edward called. The driver did not answer right away. Then his head turned halfway. "Yes, sir?" Malik felt his stomach drop. Patrick. That was not the name Malik had heard. Carl quickly smiled. Too wide. "See? He's with the service. There's no issue here." But Edward did not smile back. "What happened to Mr. Benson?" Edward asked. The driver paused for a breath too long. "Car trouble, sir," he said. "Company sent me." Malik took one step forward without realizing it. "No," he said. Carl swung toward him. "Enough!" "No," Malik repeated, louder now. His voice shook, but it did not break. "Mr. Benson's car didn't just have trouble. I saw something." Edward looked back at him. Carl's patience snapped. "Mr. Langford, please. This boy is making a scene in front of paying guests." "I saw two men near the church," Malik said, words spilling faster now because fear had started pushing them out. "By the alley behind St. Luke's. One of them had Mr. Benson's hat. It fell in the water. And my mom saw them too. She told me to hide. Then He stopped. The words caught in his throat. Edward took one step toward him. "Then she what?" Malik's fingers dug into the worn strap of his backpack. He had not meant to say that part yet. Saying it made it real. Saying it meant his mother was not just late, not just busy, not just somewhere in the kitchen where phones did not work. It meant she might be in trouble. Carl's face shifted for the first time. Not kindness, exactly. More like irritation mixed with worry that this could become bad publicity. "Where is your mother?" Edward asked. Malik looked past him to the hotel, to the shining doors, to the people inside who never had to wonder if someone they loved had disappeared between one poor block and one rich building. "She was supposed to meet me at the bus stop," Malik whispered. "She didn't come." The traffic light changed again. Tires hissed on wet pavement. Somewhere down the street, a bus sighed as it pulled away from the curb. Edward Langford stood very still. Then he did something Malik did not expect. He lowered his coffee cup onto the stone edge of the hotel planter, as gently as if setting down something breakable. He slipped his phone from his coat pocket and glanced once at the black SUV. The driver was watching them now, not openly. Not enough for Carl to notice. But Malik saw it. The angle of the cap had changed. The stillness had changed. The man behind the wheel knew something had gone wrong. Edward looked back at Malik. "What's your name, son?" "Malik," he said. "Malik Carter." Edward's voice dropped lower. "Malik Carter, I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm going to walk back inside the hotel. You are going to walk with me, slowly. You are not going to look at that car again. Do you understand?" Malik's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Yes, sir. Carl blinked. Mr. Langford, surely you don't think... Edward turned to him, and whatever Carl saw in his face made the manager close his mouth. I think, Edward said quietly, that this boy may have just saved my life. Malik could not breathe for a second, not because of pride, not because of relief, but because Edward Langford had said it in front of everyone, in front of Carl, in front of the doorman, in front of the valet who had looked at Malik like he was a stain on the sidewalk. This boy. Not these kids. This boy. Edward placed one hand lightly on Malik's shoulder and guided him toward the hotel entrance. Malik tried not to limp from the sting in his scraped knee. He tried not to look back at the SUV. But as they passed through the brass-framed doors into the warm lobby, Malik caught the reflection in the glass. The driver inside the black SUV had turned his head fully now, and he was staring straight at them. For a brief second, Malik felt as if all the warmth inside the hotel lobby had vanished. The revolving doors spun behind them with a soft whisper. Guests rolled expensive luggage across polished marble floors. Somewhere near the restaurant entrance, silverware clinked against plates and coffee cups. A pianist was playing something slow and elegant near the far wall, but Malik barely heard any of it. All he could think about was the man in the SUV. The man knew. He knew something had gone wrong. Edward Langford kept walking. His hand remained lightly on Malik's shoulder, calm and steady, but there was something different in the billionaire's face now. The easy rhythm of his morning had disappeared. The smile he had worn outside was gone. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught him how to recognize danger when it appeared in unexpected places. And danger had just arrived through the voice of an 11-year-old boy. The security desk sat near the center of the lobby beneath a massive chandelier. Two guards looked up immediately when Edward approached. "Good morning, Mr. Langford." Edward nodded once. "Frank, I need a private room." The older guard blinked. "Sir?" "A private room. Now." Frank had worked security at the hotel for over 15 years. He had seen celebrities, politicians, athletes, and billionaires come through those doors. He had never heard Edward Langford use that tone. "Yes, sir." Without another question, Frank stepped from behind the desk and led them toward a small conference room tucked beside the executive offices. Carl hurried after them. "Mr. Langford, this is getting ridiculous." Nobody answered. Carl tried again. "With respect, sir, we have investors arriving in less than 30 minutes. The board meeting." Edward stopped walking. The sudden pause almost made Carl bump into him. When Edward turned around, his voice remained polite. "Carl, how long have you worked here?" Carl frowned. "Almost 8 years. And in those 8 years, how many times have I interrupted my own schedule for no reason?" Carl hesitated. "Well, never." Edward nodded. "Then perhaps there is a reason now." Carl's jaw tightened. Malik lowered his eyes. He knew that look. Adults often wore it when they realized someone poor might actually be right. Frank opened the conference room door. Inside, the room was simple compared to the luxury outside. A long wooden table, 8 chairs, a wall-mounted television, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the wet Chicago streets below. Edward gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, Malik." Malik obeyed. His backpack remained clutched against his chest. Edward sat across from him. Frank stayed near the door. Carl folded his arms. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Outside the windows, clouds drifted slowly above the city skyline. Finally, Edward leaned forward. "Tell me everything." The words were simple. But unlike Carl, unlike teachers who were too busy, unlike strangers who made assumptions before listening, Edward actually meant them. Malik swallowed. His voice came out small at first. I know Mr. Benson. Edward nodded. How? He gives me rides sometimes. Carl immediately scoffed. A chauffeur gives random children rides? Malik flinched. Edward raised a hand without taking his eyes off the boy. Carl fell silent. My mom works near here, Malik continued. Sometimes her shift ends after the buses stop running. What does your mother do? She works in the church kitchen, and sometimes she helps with laundry for the hotel. Edward nodded slowly. Malik continued. Mr. Benson started driving us home when it got cold last winter. A memory surfaced, snow falling under yellow streetlights, his mother carrying grocery bags, Mr. Benson rolling down the SUV window. Need a lift? No speeches, no pity, just kindness. He never charged us, Malik said quietly. He sounds like Walter. Edward stared at the table for a moment. Walter Benson had worked for him nearly 12 years. Dependable, honest, quiet. The kind of man who remembered birthdays and never forgot a promise. Tell me about this morning. Malik took a breath. The room suddenly felt smaller. Before school, I saw Mom looking at her phone. What time? Maybe 6. What was wrong? She got quiet. The boy looked down. My mom only gets quiet when she's scared. Edward exchanged a glance with Frank. Did she tell you why? No. Did you see the message? Only part of it. What part? Malik frowned as he tried to remember. The kitchen light. The cereal bowl. His mother standing beside the counter. The glow from her phone screen. I saw Mr. Benson's name. Edward leaned back slightly. What did it say? I couldn't read all of it. Malik squeezed the strap of his backpack, but I remember seeing the words, car trouble. The room became very still. Frank spoke for the first time. Sir, should I contact the transportation company? Edward nodded. Do it. Frank stepped outside. Carl sighed dramatically. This still doesn't prove anything. Malik felt heat rise into his face. There it was again. The same thing. The assumption. The belief that because he was poor, because he waited for buses, because his sneakers were worn, his words mattered less. Edward noticed. What happened next, Malik? I went with my mom toward the church. Why? She starts work there before coming here. And? Malik swallowed. His heart began beating faster. He could still see it. The alley, the wet pavement, the gray morning sky. Mom stopped walking. What did she see? 2 men. Edward's expression sharpened. Where? Behind the church. What were they doing? Malik hesitated. They were talking to Mr. Benson. Carl opened his mouth, closed it again. Something in the boy's face made interruption impossible. Were they arguing? I think so. How close were you? Across the street. What happened? Malik stared at the tabletop. I saw one of them grab his arm. Nobody moved. The city noise outside seemed very far away now. Then what? Edward asked. Mom told me to hide. The memory hit harder this time. His mother's hand gripping his shoulder. The fear in her eyes. The urgency. Hide, baby. Right now. Did you? Yes. Where? Behind the donation bins. Edward nodded. And then? Malik's voice became softer. I lost sight of them. How long? A minute, maybe. What happened when you came back? The boy looked up. His eyes were wet now. Mr. Benson was gone. Silence. And your mother? Malik's throat tightened. She was gone too. Nobody spoke. Even Carl looked uncomfortable now. Edward stared out the window. Rainwater slid down the glass. Far below, traffic crawled through the streets. Finally, Frank returned. His expression was different. Not alarmed, but serious, very serious. Edward noticed immediately. What is it? Frank shut the door behind him. I reached Hadley Executive Transportation. And? They have no record of sending a replacement driver? Carl's face lost color. Edward's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Frank looked directly at him. Walter Benson was assigned to your pickup this morning. A chill moved through the room. No substitute was scheduled. Carl stared. That can't be right, Frank continued. The dispatcher says Walter never called in sick. Nobody moved. Malik suddenly wished he could see his mother. Just once, just long enough to know she was okay. Edward folded his hands. What else, Rup? Frank hesitated, then spoke carefully. The dispatcher has been trying to reach Walter for nearly 2 hours. The room became completely silent. Edward looked toward the window. Down below, beyond the glass, the black SUV was still parked at the curb. Still waiting. Still watching. And for the first time that morning, Edward Langford stopped wondering whether Malik Carter had told the truth. Instead, he began wondering something far more frightening. If that man wasn't his driver, then why had he come for him at all? The question settled over the conference room like a storm cloud. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago continued moving as if nothing unusual had happened. Buses groaned through intersections. Office workers hurried beneath umbrellas. Steam rose from street grates into the cool morning air. But inside the room, everything had changed. Edward Langford walked slowly toward the window. Far below, the black SUV remained parked at the curb. Waiting. Watching. Patient. The sight sent a chill through him. A fake driver. A missing chauffeur. An 11-year-old boy who had risked being laughed at to stop him from getting into that vehicle. None of it fit together yet. But it was beginning to form a shape, and Edward had spent enough years in business to know when small details were hiding a larger truth. He turned away from the glass. Malik. The boy immediately sat straighter. Yes, sir? You said your mother received a message from Walter Benson this morning. Yes. Before you saw those men? Yes, sir. Edward nodded. Tell me about your mother. The question caught Malik by surprise. For a moment, he wasn't thinking about SUVs or missing drivers. He was thinking about home, a tiny apartment above a discount grocery store, the sound of pipes rattling in winter, the smell of laundry drying over kitchen chairs because they couldn't always afford the laundromat. My mom works a lot. Edward smiled faintly. That wasn't exactly what I asked. Malik lowered his eyes. I know. Then he smiled too, a small smile, the kind children wore when they knew someone was trying to be kind. She works 2 jobs. What jobs? She helps at St. Luke's Community Kitchen in the mornings. Edward recognized the name. The church was only a few blocks away. It provided meals to hundreds of struggling families every week. And the second job? She does laundry for the hotel sometimes. Carl shifted uncomfortably. Edward noticed. Sometimes? Edward asked. When they're short on staff. Malik nodded. Or when people call in sick. The boy hesitated. Mom says rich people spill more things than poor people. Frank laughed despite himself. Even Edward smiled. The tension in the room eased for a moment. Then reality returned. Tell me about this morning. Malik's smile disappeared. The memory came back immediately. The kitchen, the cereal bowl, the message, the fear. His mother standing perfectly still beside the counter. She got scared. What makes you say that? My mom doesn't scare easy. The words came quickly now. She got evicted once and never cried. She worked with a broken wrist for 3 weeks. She stayed calm when our electricity got shut off. He paused. But when she looked at that message, his voice softened. She looked afraid. Edward listened carefully, not just to the words, to the boy. People often ignored children because they assumed children didn't understand much. But children noticed everything, especially children who had learned to survive. What happened after she saw it? She told me to finish breakfast. And? She wasn't hungry anymore. Frank and Edward exchanged another glance. That mattered. Small details always mattered. Then we walked to St. Luke's. Malik looked down at the conference table. The wood surface reflected the soft light from the windows. I remember because it had just stopped raining. His voice became distant, as if he were watching the memory instead of telling it. The sidewalks were shiny. There were puddles everywhere. Mom kept checking her phone. What was she looking for? I don't know. The answer came instantly. Because it was true. Then we got near the church. The room became silent again. This part hurt. Edward could see it. The memory was still fresh. Too fresh. What happened? Malik swallowed. We saw Mr. Benson. The image returned. Gray morning light. The church bell tower. The smell of wet brick. Walter Benson standing near the alley. Only he wasn't alone. There were 2 men. What did they look like? One wore a dark jacket. The other had a baseball cap. Could you see their faces? Not really. Edward nodded. Go on. At first I thought they were asking for directions. The boy's hands tightened around the backpack strap. But then one grabbed Mr. Benson's arm. Carl's expression changed. For the first time, there was no skepticism left. Only concern. Did Walter look upset? Edward asked. Yes. How do you know? He wasn't standing like himself. Edward frowned. What does that mean? Malik thought carefully. Mr. Benson always stands straight, like somebody who was in the military. Frank nodded. That sounds like Walter. But this time he looked nervous. The boy's voice dropped, like he wanted to leave. The room remained silent. Malik continued. Mom saw it too. What did she do? She grabbed my shoulder. The memory hit him hard. Hide, baby. Right now. Not later. Now. She pushed me behind the donation bins. Edward listened. Every word felt important. What happened next? I stayed there. For how long? I don't know. A minute maybe. Maybe 2. What were you doing? Waiting. The answer came quickly. Then slower. Being scared. Nobody spoke. The honesty of it filled the room. Outside, a siren wailed faintly somewhere downtown, then faded away. When you came out, Edward said gently. What did you see? Malik's eyes glistened. Nothing. The single word landed heavily. The men were gone. Mr. Benson was gone. My mom was gone. The room fell completely silent. Frank looked toward the floor. Even Carl seemed unable to meet the boy's eyes. Edward stared at Malik for several long seconds. The child looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like he'd been carrying something far too heavy for someone his age. How long did you wait? A while. Then what? I went looking for Mom. Where? Church, kitchen, bus stop, back alley, everywhere. His voice cracked slightly. I thought maybe she'd left me. The admission slipped out before he could stop it. Immediately he looked embarrassed. Edward felt something tighten inside his chest. No, he said quietly. Malik looked up. No. No. Edward's voice was firm. A mother who tells her child to hide is trying to protect him. The boy stared at him. She didn't leave you. For the first time all morning, Malik looked like he wanted to believe someone. Before he could answer, Frank's radio crackled. The sound made everyone jump. Frank immediately lifted it. A voice spoke urgently through static. Frank, we've got something. What is it? Camera footage. The room froze. Edward stepped forward. What footage? The loading dock cameras. Frank listened. Then his expression changed. Not fear, not relief. Something in between, sir, he said slowly. I think you're going to want to see this. Edward's eyes narrowed. Show me. Frank moved toward the door. Carl followed. Edward looked back at Malik. The boy was already standing. Hope and fear battled across his face. Is it my mom? Frank hesitated. I don't know. The answer was honest, and somehow that made it worse. Edward rested a hand on Malik's shoulder. Come with us. Together, they left the conference room. The hotel hallway seemed quieter now, longer. The polished floors reflected the overhead lights. Staff members stepped aside as Edward passed. Nobody spoke. Nobody asked questions. Something serious was happening. Everyone could feel it. Frank led them toward the security office at the rear of the building. The door opened. Inside, dozens of monitors covered an entire wall. Parking garages, hallways, loading docks, service elevators, storage rooms. Every corner of the hotel appeared somewhere on those screens. A younger security officer stood beside one monitor. His face looked pale. Show us. The officer nodded. He pressed a key. The footage began playing. A timestamp appeared. 6:17 a.m. The loading dock. Rainwater dripping from metal awnings. Delivery trucks parked near the rear entrance. And then, Walter Benson appeared on screen. Alive. Walking. Carrying a travel mug. Malik's heart leaped. That's him. Edward leaned closer. Walter stopped, turned, looked toward someone off camera. His expression changed. Then two figures entered the frame, one in a dark jacket, one in a baseball cap. The same description Malik had given. The room became silent. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. And then the video continued. Walter followed them out of sight. Not forced, not dragged. Simply walking. As if someone had said something important. Something that made him go willingly. The screen froze. The timestamp remained glowing in the corner. 6:17 a.m. Edward stared at the image. Malik stared too, his heart pounding. Because for the first time that morning, they had proof. Proof that he wasn't imagining things. Proof that Walter Benson had truly been there. Proof that something had happened. But another realization arrived immediately after. If Walter walked away willingly, then what had those men said to him? And where had they taken him afterward? The frozen image on the security monitor seemed to ask the same question. Walter Benson stood in the loading dock footage with his coffee mug in one hand and uncertainty on his face. Two strangers had approached him. Moments later, all three had disappeared from view. Nobody in the security room spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of computers and the rainwater dripping somewhere outside the building. "Can you rewind it?" Edward asked quietly. The younger security officer nodded. The footage rolled backward. Walter walked in reverse across the screen. The two men vanished. Then the video played forward again. This time everyone watched more carefully. "Stop!" Malik suddenly said. The officer paused the video. Edward turned toward him. "What is it?" Malik stepped closer to the monitor. His heart was pounding. "There." He pointed toward the lower corner of the screen, near a puddle reflecting the gray morning sky. A dark object lay on the ground. The officer zoomed in. The image sharpened. A chauffeur's cap. Walter Benson's cap. The same one Malik had seen near St. Luke's Church. Frank stared at the screen. "You saw that this morning?" Malik nodded. "In the alley." The room grew quiet again. Edward looked at him carefully. "You never mentioned the hat." "I wasn't sure it mattered." "It matters," Edward said. Everything mattered now. Frank switched to another camera angle covering the rear service road. The footage flickered. A narrow lane appeared between the hotel and a brick warehouse. Delivery trucks, dumpster bins, wet pavement, and then a woman entered the frame. Malik's breath caught. "Mom." Tanya Carter was moving quickly through the alley. She looked frightened. She kept glancing over her shoulder. In one hand, she held her phone. In the other was a small canvas work bag. She disappeared around the corner. Seconds later, the same two men appeared. One pointed in the direction Tanya had gone. Then both hurried after her. The video ended. Malik felt the room tilt. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. She saw something. Frank nodded. "It looks that way." "Where did she go?" Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Edward's expression hardened. This was no longer just about a missing driver. A hard-working mother who spent her mornings serving meals at a community kitchen had vanished too. And she had vanished after seeing the same men. Carl slowly lowered himself into a chair. The skepticism that had filled him earlier was gone. "Dear God," he whispered. Malik stared at the blank monitor. His mother had told him to hide. His mother had always known what to do. But now she was missing. A knot tightened inside his chest. What if she's hurt? The question came out so quietly that nobody answered immediately. Edward walked over and knelt beside him. For the first time that morning, the billionaire wasn't speaking to a witness. He was speaking to a scared child. "We're going to find her." Malik looked up. "You don't know that." "No," Edward admitted. "But I know we're going to try." The honesty surprised him. No false promises, no easy words, just truth. Frank's radio crackled again. A voice spoke urgently through static. "Frank, we found another camera." Everyone turned. "What camera?" Frank asked. "The church." The room froze. The church security office just called back. Edward stood. "What did they find?" The radio crackled. Then the answer came. "They have footage from the alley behind St. Luke's." Malik's stomach dropped. because whatever happened next might finally reveal what Tanya had seen and why she never came back. The drive to St. Luke's Community Church took less than 5 minutes, but to Malik it felt longer than the entire morning. Rainwater still clung to the sidewalks. The clouds hung low over South Chicago, turning the city gray and silver. Frank drove. Edward sat beside him. Malik sat in the back seat, staring out the window at familiar streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every corner reminded him of his mother. The grocery store, where she stretched $20 into a week of meals. The laundromat, where she folded clothes late at night. The little bookstore that let Malik sit in the corner and read when winter made the apartment too cold. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. Edward glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You okay back there?" Malik nodded automatically. It was the answer he always gave. The answer poor kids learned early. The answer that meant no. The SUV rolled to a stop beside St. Luke's. The church was old brick and white stone. Rain darkened the walls. A wooden cross stood above the entrance. Father Raymond was already waiting outside. The elderly priest greeted Edward with a worried expression. "The security footage is ready." Edward shook his hand. "Thank you for helping." "Of course." Father Raymond looked at Malik. His face softened. "Your mother is a good woman." The words hit harder than expected. Malik lowered his eyes. "She helps everyone here," the priest continued, "even when she's exhausted." Edward noticed the boy's reaction. "Tell me about her." Father Raymond smiled sadly. "Every Thursday, she arrives before sunrise." He gestured toward the church kitchen. "She serves breakfast. She cleans tables. She carries boxes. She checks on the elderly people who come here alone." The priest shook his head. "And she never leaves until everyone else has eaten." Malik swallowed hard. That sounded exactly like his mother. Because Tanya Carter had always been that way. Even when they barely had enough. Even when life seemed unfair. Even when nobody noticed. The four of them entered the church office. A volunteer named Rosa sat beside a computer monitor. The moment she saw Malik, she stood. "Oh, honey." She wrapped him in a hug before he could react. The scent of coffee and flour clung to her sweater. "Your mother talks about you every day." Malik nodded, unable to speak. Rosa wiped her eyes and turned toward Edward. "She was here this morning." "What time?" Edward asked. "Just after 6, and..." She was worried. Everyone in the room became still. Rosa pointed toward the screen. "She showed me a text message." Edward stepped closer. "What did it say?" "Something about Mr. Benson." Rosa frowned while trying to remember. "I didn't read all of it." But she said something felt wrong. "What exactly?" Rosa looked at Malik, then back at Edward. She said Walter Benson would never send a text that short. Edward blinked. "What?" She knew him. The room fell silent. Rosa folded her arms. Walter always wrote complete messages. He used punctuation. He checked on people. He wasn't the type to send 2 quick sentences and disappear. Frank looked surprised. A text message bothered her that much? It wasn't only the message. Rosa shook her head. It was the feeling. The feeling. Edward understood that. Instinct had saved many people from many mistakes. Sometimes the smallest detail was enough. Father Raymond turned on the footage. The screen flickered. The alley behind St. Luke's appeared. Wet pavement, garbage bins, a chain-link fence. The timestamp read 6:12 a.m. Everyone watched. Walter Benson entered the frame, just as before, carrying his coffee, walking toward the rear entrance. Then 2 men approached. The man in the baseball cap said something. Walter stopped. The second man spoke. Walter's expression changed. Not fear, not anger, concern. Edward leaned closer. What did they tell him? The footage had no sound, only images, only guesses. Walter glanced down the alley, then looked at his phone, then followed them. The screen continued. 10 seconds later, Tanya entered. She moved quickly. Her eyes followed the same direction. She looked frightened. She raised her phone, almost as if taking a photograph. Then something happened. Pause. Edward pointed. The image froze. Everyone stared. One of the men had partially turned. His face appeared for less than a second. But it was visible. Frank stepped closer. Can you zoom in? Rosa enlarged the frame. The image became grainy, yet clear enough. A man in his 40s, expensive watch, dark coat, sharp jawline. Not a random criminal, not a drifter. Someone polished. Someone who looked like he belonged in a boardroom. Edward frowned. Do you know him? No. But something about the face bothered him, like a memory he couldn't quite reach. The footage resumed. Tanya disappeared after the men. The screen rolled forward. Nothing. No Tanya. No Walter. No strangers. Just an empty alley. Rain falling softly. The recording ended. Nobody moved. The room felt colder now. He wasn't kidnapping Walter, Malik said suddenly. Every head turned. Why do you say that? The boy pointed toward the frozen image. Mr. Benson followed them. Frank nodded slowly. He did. Malik looked at the screen. He trusted them. The realization settled over everyone. Walter Benson had not been forced, at least not at first. Someone had convinced him to come. Someone he believed. Someone who knew him. Edward stared at the image. The expensive watch. The tailored coat. The calm posture. This wasn't random. This was planned. Very carefully planned. And then another thought arrived. A worse thought. If Walter trusted them, maybe Tanya recognized one of them. Maybe that was why she followed. Maybe that was why she disappeared. Silence filled the room. Then Rosa spoke softly. There's something else. Edward turned. What? Rosa hesitated. Tanya left something behind. She opened a drawer. Inside was a folded envelope. Yellow. Worn. Simple. Tanya asked me to keep this yesterday. Malik frowned. What is it? She said if anything ever happened. Rosa stopped. The room grew still. If anything ever happened, give it to Malik. Malik stared. His pulse quickened. Edward exchanged a glance with Frank. Rosa handed him the envelope. The paper felt surprisingly heavy. His name was written across the front, in Tanya's handwriting. For Malik. His hands began to shake, because suddenly the morning felt bigger than missing drivers, bigger than strange texts, bigger than the SUV. His mother had been worried before today, and somehow, she had known enough to prepare for something she hoped would never happen. Malik slowly looked up. Fear filled his eyes. What did Mom know? Nobody had an answer. Not yet. But Edward Langford stared at the envelope and felt the same thing he had felt the moment Malik warned him outside the hotel. A door had opened, and whatever waited behind it was about to change everything. The envelope sat in Malik's hands like it weighed 10 pounds. Nobody in the church office spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere down the hall, volunteers moved trays and stacked coffee cups for the lunch service. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary day felt strangely distant. Malik stared at his name written across the front. For Malik. His mother's handwriting was neat, careful, and familiar. The same handwriting that filled permission slips, grocery lists, birthday cards, and notes left on the refrigerator. Edward stood beside him. "You should open it." Malik looked up. "What if it's bad?" The question was honest. Childishly honest. The kind of question adults often stopped asking out loud. Edward glanced toward Father Raymond. The priest lowered his eyes. Nobody knew what was inside. But everyone knew the envelope existed because Tanya Carter had been worried about something before she disappeared. "You won't have to read it alone," Edward said. Malik took a slow breath, then he opened it. Inside was a folded letter and a small photograph. The photograph fell into his lap first. His eyes widened. It was old, at least a few years old. The picture showed Tanya standing outside St. Luke's Community Church. Walter Benson stood beside her. Both were smiling. Between them stood a much younger Malik holding a paper bag full of groceries. The sight hit him harder than expected. A memory surfaced immediately. Snow falling. Walter loading food into his car. His mother laughing. A night when they had almost nothing to eat. A night Walter Benson had quietly helped without asking for anything in return. Malik looked at the letter. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The room remained silent. Then he began to read. "Baby, if you are reading this, something has happened, and I am probably not where I promised to be." The words blurred immediately. Malik blinked hard. Edward noticed. "You want me to read it?" Malik hesitated, then nodded. Edward carefully took the letter. His voice became quiet, gentle. "The way people speak when they know words matter, baby. If you are reading this, something has happened, and I am probably not where I promised to be. I hope I'm wrong. I pray I'm wrong. But if I'm right, there are things you need to remember. First, none of this is your fault. Second, never let fear turn your heart hard. The world will give you reasons. Don't let it. You are stronger than you know, kinder than you know, and people notice more than you think, even when they pretend not to." Edward paused. The room had gone completely still. Malik lowered his eyes. His mother always wrote the way she spoke. Simple, direct, full of love. Edward continued. "If Walter Benson ever tells you he's not family, don't believe him. That man has helped us more times than I can count. And if something happens to me, find Walter. He'll know what to do." Edward stopped reading. Nobody said a word. Because Walter Benson was missing too, the realization settled heavily over the room. Father Raymond slowly exhaled. "She trusted him." "Yes," Rosa whispered. "She did." Edward folded the letter carefully. Then something caught his attention. Near the bottom of the page, a sentence written separately from the rest, as if added later. His eyes narrowed. "Wait." Malik looked up. "What?" Edward reread the final line. "If anything feels wrong, trust what you see, not what powerful people tell you to see." The room went silent again. Edward looked at the sentence for a long moment, then at the photograph, then at Malik. A strange feeling moved through him, because that single sentence perfectly described what had happened this morning. Everyone else had trusted appearances. The luxury SUV, the uniform, the hotel, the schedule. Only Malik had trusted what he saw. And because of that, Edward Langford was still alive. Frank's phone rang. The sound shattered the silence. He checked the screen immediately. His expression changed. "It's the hotel." Edward straightened. "What is it?" Frank answered. Listened. Then his eyes widened. "Are you sure?" A pause. More listening. Then he ended the call. Nobody moved. "What happened?" Edward asked. Frank looked toward him. The security team reviewed additional footage. And the SUV. Edward's jaw tightened. "What about it?" Frank swallowed. "It arrived almost 2 hours before your scheduled pickup." Nobody spoke. For a second, even the rain seemed quieter. 2 hours? Edward repeated. Frank nodded. It was parked outside long before Walter Benson was supposed to arrive. Father Raymond frowned. "That doesn't sound like a driver." "No," Edward said quietly. "It doesn't. A driver arrives early. A professional arrives early. But nobody arrives 2 hours early to sit and wait unless they are watching. Planning. Preparing." Malik suddenly remembered something. "Wait." Everyone turned. "What is it?" Edward asked. "The driver. What about him?" Malik thought carefully. Back at the hotel, the SUV, the man behind the wheel, the way he sat, the way he watched. Then it clicked. He never looked bored. Frank frowned. "What? People waiting that long get bored." The boy shrugged. "They check their phone. They drink coffee. They look around." But he didn't. Edward's eyes narrowed. Because the child was right. Someone sitting alone in a car for 2 hours should have shown signs of waiting. The man hadn't. He had shown signs of expecting. The difference mattered. A lot. Frank's phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. When it ended, his face looked even more serious. "What now?" Edward asked. Frank lowered the phone. The transportation company found something. The room froze. Walter Benson's vehicle. Malik's heart jumped. "Where?" "3 blocks from his apartment." "Is he there?" Frank shook his head. "No." Hope vanished almost instantly. Then what did they find? Frank looked toward Edward. "A witness." Everyone waited. "The witness says Walter left home on time this morning." "That matches his schedule," Edward said. Frank nodded. "But he never got into his own car." The room became silent. The implications were obvious. Someone had intercepted him before his workday even started, before he ever reached the hotel, before Edward ever stepped outside. This had been planned, carefully, methodically. And for the first time all morning, Edward stopped seeing himself as the center of the story. Instead, he looked at Malik, at the worn backpack, the faded sweater, the nervous hands, the child who had been ignored by nearly everyone, the child who kept noticing things adults missed, the child whose mother had taught him to pay attention. If Malik had boarded his bus, if he had chosen school over speaking up, if he had stayed silent after Carl mocked him, Edward felt a chill run through his body. The fake driver would have succeeded. The realization was impossible to ignore now. A poor kid from South Chicago had done what an entire security team had failed to do. And that fact was beginning to change something inside Edward Langford. Something he had not expected. Because for years he had built hospitals, companies, foundations, and charities. Yet somehow he had almost overlooked the bravest person he met all year. A soft knock interrupted the moment. A church volunteer stepped into the office. "Mr. Langford?" "Yes?" "There's someone outside asking for you." Edward frowned. "Who?" The volunteer hesitated. He wouldn't give his name. Every person in the room immediately became alert. "What did he say?" Frank asked. The volunteer swallowed. "He said he knows what happened to Walter Benson." And then he added 6 words that made Malik's blood run cold. "He says Tanya Carter saw it too." Nobody moved. The church office seemed to shrink around them. Rain tapped against the windows. A truck rumbled somewhere outside. Malik stared at the volunteer standing in the doorway. "What does that mean?" he asked. The volunteer swallowed. "I don't know." Frank was already moving. "Where is he?" "Outside." "Alone?" "Yes." Frank looked toward Edward. Edward nodded once. "Let's hear what he has to say." The group moved quickly through the church hallway. Malik stayed close beside Edward. For the first time that morning, the billionaire seemed less like a stranger and more like an anchor. Outside, the rain had faded to a mist. A man stood beneath the church awning, mid-50s, thin, gray beard, orange maintenance jacket. His hands remained visible at his sides. The moment he saw Malik, his expression softened. Then he looked at Edward. "You Mr. Langford?" "Yes." "You Walter Benson's employer?" "Yes." The man nodded. "My name's Earl." "What do you know?" Frank asked. Earl glanced around nervously. "I work maintenance behind the church." "Go on. This morning I saw Walter." Edward stepped forward. "What happened?" Earl rubbed the back of his neck. "At first I didn't think much of it." His eyes drifted toward Malik. "Wish I had." "What did you see?" Frank pressed. "I saw 2 men talking to him." "Did you hear them?" "Not clearly." But Walter looked worried. Malik's stomach tightened. The same word again. Worried. Not angry. Not threatened. Worried. "Then what?" Edward asked. One of them showed him something on a phone. The group exchanged glances. "A phone?" Frank said. Earl nodded. After that, Walter followed them. "Why?" "I don't know." "Did he go willingly?" Earl hesitated. "Mostly." "Mostly." The word hung in the air. "What does mostly mean?" Edward asked. Earl sighed. "It means he looked like a man who didn't have another choice." Silence followed. The church bells rang softly overhead. 11 o'clock. The sound echoed through the wet streets. "What happened next?" Malik asked quietly. Earl looked at him. For a moment he seemed reluctant. Then he spoke. "Your mom showed up." Malik's heart jumped. "She was there?" "Yes." "She saw everything?" "Maybe not everything." The maintenance worker looked toward the alley. "But she saw enough." Edward narrowed his eyes. "What did she do?" "She followed them." Malik's chest tightened. "Alone?" "Yes." "Did anyone go with her?" "No." The answer hit hard. Because that sounded exactly like Tanya Carter. If she thought someone was in trouble, she went. Whether she could help or not. Whether it was safe or not. That was who she was. "She kept looking at her phone," Earl continued. "Then she took a picture." Frank immediately looked up. "A picture?" Earl nodded. "Looked like she snapped a photo before going after them." The group fell silent. Edward's mind immediately began connecting pieces. Tanya had taken a photograph, then disappeared. If that photo still existed, it might explain everything. Did you see where they went? Edward asked. Earl pointed south, toward the hotel. The answer surprised everyone. The hotel? Frank said. Yes. Not away from it? No. The maintenance worker shook his head. They headed straight toward the service entrances. Edward's expression hardened. Back toward the Langford Grand. Back toward his building. Back toward the place where the fake SUV had been waiting. A cold realization spread through the group. Whatever happened to Walter? Whatever happened to Tanya? It somehow connected to the hotel. Frank's phone rang. He answered immediately. After only 10 seconds, his face changed, this time dramatically. What? Everyone stared. What is it? Edward asked. Frank listened, then ended the call. His voice dropped. Security found something. The tension returned instantly. What? The basement cameras. Edward froze. The hotel basement? Yes. Which camera? The service corridor. Nobody spoke. Frank continued. The footage includes Tanya. Malik felt the blood drain from his face. She's alive? We don't know. Then what does it show? Frank took a breath. She entered the basement. Hope flickered. At least she had made it inside. At what time? 6:29. Edward frowned. Show me. 20 minutes later, they were back at the hotel. The lobby looked completely different now. Uniformed officers had arrived. Plainclothes detectives stood near the security desk. Guests whispered. Employees moved quickly. Something serious was happening. Everyone could feel it. Malik followed Edward through the secured hallway into the monitoring room. The footage was already loaded. A detective stood beside the screen. Ready? Edward nodded. The recording began. Timestamp, 6:29 a.m. A narrow service corridor appeared. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, storage doors. At the far end, Tanya Carter. Malik stepped closer. Mom. She moved quickly, looking over her shoulder, clutching her phone. The hallway was empty. Then she stopped. Suddenly, as if she had heard something or seen something. The image continued. Tanya looked down at her phone. Her eyes widened. Then she turned sharply toward a Saitao's door. What is that room? Edward asked. The detective checked a floor plan. Cold storage. The footage rolled. Tanya approached the door, reached for the handle, paused, then disappeared inside. The screen showed only the empty hallway. 5 seconds passed. 10, 20, 30. Nobody moved. The corridor remained empty. Then another figure appeared. The same man from the church footage. Dark coat, expensive watch, sharp jawline. The man walked calmly down the hallway, stopped at the storage door, looked around, then entered. The room fell silent. The footage continued. 1 minute passed. 2, 3. The man emerged. Alone. Tanya did not. Malik felt his chest tighten. Where is she? Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. The man adjusted his cuff, then calmly walked away. The timestamp continued counting. The hallway remained empty. 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 No Tanya. No movement. Nothing. The footage ended. Silence filled the room. Even the detectives looked uneasy. Malik stared at the frozen screen. His mother had gone into that room, but she had never come back out. A detective finally spoke. We searched the room. Edward turned, and it was empty. What? No signs of struggle. No hidden exits? No one inside. Frank frowned. That makes no sense. No, the detective agreed. It doesn't. Edward stared at the image of the man with the expensive watch. Something about him felt familiar. Not personally, professionally, like a face from another world. A boardroom, a fundraiser, a meeting, somewhere. Somehow. He had seen him before. Then another detective entered the room carrying a tablet. Sir. Everyone turned. What is it? The detective looked directly at Edward. We recovered the image Tanya took on her phone. The room froze. Malik's heart began pounding, because if Tanya had photographed something important, this might finally reveal who was behind everything. The detective turned the tablet around, and the moment Edward Langford saw the photograph, his face went completely white. Nobody in the security room spoke. The detectives looked at Edward. Frank looked at Edward. Even Malik, who could not yet see the screen, knew something had changed. The billionaire's expression told him everything. It was the face of a man who had just recognized a ghost from his own world. Slowly, Edward took the tablet. His eyes stayed fixed on the image. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then he exhaled. Zoom in. The detective enlarged the photograph. The image was grainy, taken quickly, taken from a distance, but it was clear enough. The man with the expensive watch stood near the church alley. Beside him was another man, and parked behind them was a dark sedan. The license plate was partially visible, but that wasn't what made Edward go pale. It was the face. The second face. A face Edward knew, not from television, not from newspapers, from boardrooms, fundraisers, private meetings, years of business. Sir? Frank asked carefully. Edward lowered the tablet. His voice had become very quiet. I've seen him before. The room froze. Who is he? The detective asked. Edward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the rain-streaked window, as if searching through years of memories. Then he finally spoke. He's connected to one of my investors. The words landed heavily. The detectives exchanged glances. What kind of investor? A major one. Nobody liked the sound of that. Malik watched Edward carefully. For the first time all morning, the billionaire looked genuinely shaken. Not afraid, not panicked, but deeply unsettled. Because danger coming from strangers was one thing. Danger coming from people inside your own circle was something else entirely. The detective zoomed further. The photograph sharpened slightly. The expensive watch, the dark coat, the polished shoes. The man looked exactly like someone who belonged in expensive hotels and private meetings. Not dark alleys, not missing person investigations, not whatever this had become. What happens now? Malik asked quietly. The question broke the silence. Edward looked at him, then at the tablet, then back at the boy. We find your mother. Simple. Direct. The answer Malik needed. Before anyone could speak again, another detective entered the room. Sir. Everyone turned. What is it? Frank asked. The detective's expression was urgent. The vehicle. What vehicle? The black SUV. Instant tension filled the room. Edward straightened immediately. What about it? The detective looked toward the security monitors. It just started moving. Every person in the room froze. Malik's stomach dropped. The fake driver. The SUV. The man who had nearly taken Edward away. "He's leaving?" Frank asked. "Looks that way." The room exploded into motion. Detectives grabbed radios. Security officers moved toward the door. The monitor switched to a live camera feed. Outside the hotel, the black SUV sat at the curb. Its brake lights glowed red through the misty afternoon. The engine was running, and slowly, very slowly, the vehicle began pulling away from the sidewalk. "Damn it," Frank muttered. "He knows." Edward's eyes narrowed. The driver had realized something was wrong. The delay, the police presence, the unanswered calls. Whatever plan had existed that morning was falling apart, and now he was trying to disappear. A detective reached for his radio. "Let's move." But Edward suddenly raised a hand. "Wait." Everyone stopped. The detective frowned. "Sir? If he runs now, we lose him. We can track him." "Maybe." Edward stepped closer to the monitor. "But if he's connected to whoever took Tanya and Walter, he's our best lead." The room fell silent. Because he was right. The fake driver might be the only direct connection they had. The only person who knew where Tanya had gone. The only person who knew what happened to Walter Benson. Frank looked at the screen. The SUV had reached the intersection. One more turn, and it would disappear into downtown traffic. "What do you want to do?" Edward thought for only a second. Then he made a decision. "The SUV doesn't leave." The room became still. "What?" Edward's voice hardened. "The SUV doesn't leave." A detective immediately understood. He grabbed his radio. "Units move now." The response came instantly through static. Outside, the city continued moving normally. Pedestrians crossed streets. Buses rolled past. Rain misted through the air. Nobody knew an operation had just begun. The SUV reached the corner, then stopped. Not because the driver wanted to stop, because an unmarked police vehicle appeared ahead of him. At the same moment, another unmarked vehicle entered from behind. The driver hesitated. The brake lights brightened. Malik watched the screen without blinking. His heart pounded. "Is he trapped?" "Not yet," Frank said. The SUV reversed slightly, then stopped again. Another vehicle appeared from the side street. The gap was closing, slowly, carefully, without sirens, without chaos. The driver understood. On the monitor, his door remained shut. His vehicle remained still. But everyone could feel the tension. A man who had spent hours waiting outside a hotel now realized the world around him had changed. The detective beside Frank smiled grimly. "He's running out of options." The SUV remained motionless. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Nobody spoke. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Malik immediately recognized him. That's him. The fake driver. Travis Cole. Even from the security footage, the tension in his body was obvious. He looked up the street, then down, calculating, thinking, searching for a way out. But there wasn't one. More officers appeared. Plain clothes. Unmarked vehicles. No flashing lights. Just a tightening circle. Edward watched carefully. He noticed something. Zoom in. The camera tightened. Travis glanced toward the passenger seat. Only for a moment. But it was enough. "What is he looking at?" Malik asked. The detective zoomed further. The image became grainy, yet something was visible. A phone. lying face up on the passenger seat. Its screen lit briefly, then went dark. Edward's eyes narrowed. He's waiting. For what? Frank asked. A call. The realization spread through the room. Travis wasn't trying to escape. Not yet. He was waiting for instructions, waiting for someone higher up, someone who still thought the plan could be salvaged. The detective beside the monitor spoke. Should we move in? Edward looked at the image, then at Malik, then at Tanya's photograph. No. Everyone stared. What? Not yet. The detective frowned. Sir, he's right there. I know. Edward kept watching the screen. He's nervous. He's exposed. And he's expecting contact. Frank slowly understood. If somebody calls him now... Edward nodded. We learn who he's working for. The room fell silent again. Outside, the fake driver stood beside the SUV. Rain settled on his shoulders. Traffic rolled past. And somewhere in the city, a person who believed everything was still under control was preparing to make a mistake. Malik stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists, because every second now felt connected to his mother, to Walter Benson, to the strange photograph, to the men in the alley, to everything. Then suddenly, the phone on the passenger seat lit up again. This time it stayed lit. A call was coming in, and Travis Cole immediately reached for it. Every eye in the security room locked onto the monitor. The image wasn't perfect. Rain streaked across the camera lens, softening the edges of the scene. Cars passed through the intersection. Pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. But none of that mattered. The phone on the passenger seat was glowing, and Travis was moving toward it. Can they hear him? Malik asked. One of the detectives nodded. If he answers. The room became completely silent. On the screen, Travis opened the passenger door. His hand disappeared inside. For a brief second, everyone feared he might pull out a weapon. Instead, he lifted the phone, looked at the screen, and froze. Edward narrowed his eyes. What's he doing? The detective zoomed tighter. Travis wasn't speaking. He wasn't answering. He was staring. Like a man who suddenly realized something. Then the phone went dark. The call ended. Why didn't he pick up? Frank asked. No one answered immediately. Then Edward spoke. Because he recognized the number. The room turned toward him. He knows whoever is calling. Exactly. Edward folded his arms. And he knows answering that call right now would expose them. The detective nodded slowly. That makes sense. On the screen, Travis lowered the phone. His shoulders sagged. For the first time all day, he didn't look dangerous. He looked trapped, like a man who understood the game was over. Then one of the detectives beside the monitor smiled slightly. Got him. Everyone looked over. What? We cloned the phone signal. The detective tapped a keyboard. A map appeared. Then a phone record. Then a number. The incoming call had lasted only seconds. But it was enough. The detective looked up. We have it. The room held its breath. Who called? The detective frowned. Phones registered to a shell company. Nobody was surprised. Can you trace it? Working on it. The keyboard clicks filled the room. Outside, Travis remained surrounded. Officers slowly approached. He no longer resisted. He no longer searched for escape routes. He simply stood in the rain, waiting, almost relieved, as though he knew the running part was finished. Malik stared at the screen. His thoughts weren't on Travis anymore. They were on his mother. Every new clue felt like another step toward her, or another step away, and he didn't know which. The detective suddenly sat forward. Wait. Everyone looked up. What is it? Frank asked. I have another hit. The room became still. On what? The SUV. The detective enlarged another file. Vehicle registration records, insurance records, ownership transfers. Pages of information filled the screen. Then he stopped. His eyes widened. Edward immediately noticed. What? The detective looked stunned. This SUV doesn't belong to a transportation company. Silence. Then who owns it? Frank asked. The detective swallowed. Nobody. What? It doesn't officially exist. The room erupted with questions. How is that possible? Fake registration. Stolen via IN. Paperwork cloned from another vehicle. The detective shook his head. This car was built to disappear. Edward stared at the monitor. The pieces continued sliding into place. The fake driver. The fake vehicle. The fake pickup. The missing chauffeur. The missing mother. This wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone had invested time, money, planning. Someone expected him to get into that SUV. Someone expected him to vanish. A chill moved through the room. Then another detective entered. This one moved quickly, urgently. Sir, Frank turned. What now? We searched the SUV. Everyone froze. What did you find? The detective held up a clear evidence bag. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Simple, unremarkable. Yet every eye followed it. What is it? Edward asked. A route map. The detective laid it on the table. The map unfolded. A line had been highlighted in red. Downtown streets, industrial roads, a stretch of highway. Then a final destination. The room stared. An abandoned warehouse near the edge of the city. Miles from the hotel. Miles from witnesses. Miles from help. Malik felt cold. Because suddenly everything became real. That SUV had not been taking Edward to a meeting. It had been taking him somewhere else entirely. Somewhere he was never supposed to choose. The detective pointed to another item recovered from the vehicle. A small bottle, sealed, untouched. No one commented on it. No one needed to. The implication was obvious enough. The room remained silent. Then Frank looked toward Edward. You were right. Edward didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the route, because one thought refused to leave his mind. If Tanya had discovered the plan, then she might have discovered where they intended to take him. And if she knew that, she became dangerous to them. The realization made his jaw tighten. Malak noticed. What is it? Edward looked at him, then spoke carefully. Your mother may have seen more than we realized. The boy's heart sank. That's bad, isn't it? Edward didn't lie. Yes, the honesty hurt. But Malik appreciated it. People had lied to him before, told him things would magically work out, promised everything would be fine. His mother never did that. She told the truth, even when the truth hurt. Another detective approached the table. We have Travis. Everyone looked up. Is he talking? The detective nodded. A little. The room immediately came alive. What did he say? He wants a lawyer. Nobody seemed surprised. Anything else? The detective hesitated. then spoke. One thing. The room became silent again. He asked whether the woman survived. Malik stopped breathing. The woman. The detective nodded. He didn't say her name, but he asked twice. Hope exploded through Malik so suddenly it almost hurt. She survived. The words escaped before he could stop them. She survived. Nobody corrected him. Nobody wanted to. Because for the first time all day, there was something. A tiny crack in the darkness. A possibility. A reason to keep going. Edward stared toward the rain-covered windows, then at the photo Tanya had taken, then at the route map, then at Malik. And in that moment he realized something else. The entire investigation had started because a poor kid waiting for a bus refused to stay silent. Not because of technology, not because of security teams, not because of executives, because one child cared enough to speak. The realization settled heavily inside him. Then Frank's phone rang. Everyone froze again. The timing felt impossible. Frank answered immediately. Listened. His expression changed, then changed again. Frank? Edward asked. The security chief slowly lowered the phone. His voice was barely above a whisper. We found the signal. What signal? Tanya's phone. The room went silent. Every heartbeat seemed louder. Where? Frank looked at the screen, then at Edward, then at Malik. The answer landed like thunder. Inside this building. Nobody moved. For a moment the words seemed impossible. Malik blinked. Inside. The hotel? Frank nodded slowly. The signal is still active. The room exploded into motion. Detectives grabbed radios. Officers hurried toward elevators. Computer screens lit up with floor plans. The map of the Langford Grand Hotel appeared across the largest monitor. Levels, hallways, storage rooms, mechanical areas, maintenance corridors, places guests never saw. Places most employees barely knew existed. Malik stared at the screen. His mother was somewhere inside that maze, maybe only a few hundred feet away, maybe terrified, maybe waiting. The thought made his heart race. Edward was already moving. Where exactly? The detective pointed toward a blinking dot. Sublevel 2. Frank frowned. The old refrigeration area? The detective nodded. Signal keeps returning there. Carl suddenly looked pale. Nobody uses that section anymore. Everyone turned toward him. What do you mean? Edward asked. Carl swallowed. It was shut down years ago after renovations. Can someone get there? Yes. How? Service elevators. The room became silent. Because the answer explained something. Tanya had entered a cold storage room, then vanished. If there were abandoned service passages beneath the hotel, she could have been moved without appearing on most cameras. Edward's jaw tightened. Let's go, The group moved quickly through the building. The atmosphere inside the hotel had changed completely. Guests whispered. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Police officers stood near entrances. The polished luxury of the Langford Grand suddenly felt cold, like a beautiful mask hiding something ugly underneath. Malik followed closely behind Edward. The billionaire could have left him behind, could have told him to wait, could have handed him off to social workers or security. Instead, he kept looking back to make sure the boy was still there. That small act mattered more than Edward realized. Most powerful people barely noticed children like Malik, especially children from neighborhoods like his. Yet somehow, Throughout this impossible day, Edward Langford kept treating him like his voice mattered. The service elevator doors opened with a metallic groan. The group stepped inside. The ride downward felt endless. No one spoke. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Frank checked his radio. Detectives reviewed floor plans. Malik stared at the numbers descending. B2. The doors opened. Cold air rolled inside immediately. The basement looked nothing like the hotel above. No chandeliers, no marble, no polished brass. Only concrete walls, exposed pipes, storage cages, long industrial corridors lit by aging fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of dust and old machinery. A detective checked the phone tracker. This way. The group followed. Their footsteps echoed through the corridor. Every sound felt magnified. Every corner felt uncertain. Malik's hands trembled. He tried hiding it. But Edward noticed. "You okay?" "No." The honesty surprised both of them. Edward nodded. "Fair answer." They continued walking. The signal grew stronger. 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 Finally, the detective stopped. "Here." Everyone looked up. A heavy metal door stood at the end of the hallway. Plain, gray, unremarkable. A faded sign hung beside it. Old refrigeration storage authorized personnel. Only Frank tested the handle. Locked. Move. Two officers stepped forward. Within seconds, the lock gave way. The door opened. Cold air spilled into the hallway. The room beyond was dark. One officer switched on a flashlight. Then another. Beams of light swept across shelves. Crates. Old equipment. Dust. Silence. The room appeared empty. Malik's heart sank. "No." The detective checked the tracker again. "The signal is here." Everyone spread out. Searching. Checking corners. Looking behind equipment. Nothing. Then one officer paused. "Wait." The room froze. "What?" He pointed toward the floor. Scuff marks. Fresh ones. Leading toward the back wall. The detectives followed the trail. The flashlight beam moved across old refrigeration units, broken shelving. Then, a narrow door, almost invisible, hidden behind equipment. Frank stared. "What is that?" Carl looked shocked. "I didn't know that was there." The officer pulled it open. A staircase appeared, descending further underground. The room became silent, because suddenly everything made sense. Tanya hadn't disappeared. She had been taken deeper. The group moved quickly. The staircase wound downward. Concrete, metal railings, a faint humming sound somewhere below. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Malik could hear his own heartbeat. Step. 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 Then a voice crackled through a radio. "We found something." Everyone froze. "What?" The officer's voice came back. "A phone." The group hurried forward. At the bottom of the stairs sat another storage room. Smaller, older. One flashlight beam illuminated an object on the floor. A phone. Tanya's phone. Malik recognized the cracked corner immediately. That's hers. Hope and fear collided inside him. If her phone was here, then she had been here. Recently. The detective checked it. Battery still active. Frank scanned the room. "Keep looking." The search continued. Seconds stretched. Then came another shout. "Over here!" Everyone rushed toward the far side of the room. A heavy maintenance cabinet stood partially open. Inside, a figure. Malik's breath stopped. "Mom!" Tanya Carter looked up. Her eyes widened. For one impossible second, nobody moved. Then Malik ran. The room blurred around him. The detectives, the lights, the cold air. Everything disappeared. Only his mother remained. Tanya dropped to her knees, and her son crashed into her arms. The force nearly knocked both of them over. She held him tightly, as if letting go might make him disappear. "Baby." Her voice broke. "Oh God." "Mom, you okay?" "I'm okay." "You okay?" The same question. Again. 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 Neither seemed able to stop asking it. Tears streamed down Tanya's face. Malik buried his face against her shoulder. For the first time all day, he felt safe. Not completely, not forever, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to believe. The room remained silent. Even the detectives looked away for a moment. Some reunions deserved privacy. Edward stood near the doorway, watching quietly. Something shifted inside him, a feeling he hadn't expected. Because all day people had talked about money, influence, investors, business. But standing there, watching a mother hold her child, none of those things seemed important. Tanya finally looked up. Her face was exhausted, yet determined. "Walter." Edward stepped closer. "What about him?" "He tried to help." The room became silent. "He's alive?" "I think so." Relief flashed across several faces. "What happened?" Tanya took a shaky breath. Then she looked directly at Edward. "They weren't after Walter." Nobody moved. "What?" "They used Walter." Edward's eyes narrowed. "For what?" Tanya swallowed. "To get to you." The words landed heavily. Every person in the room understood immediately. The fake driver, the SUV, the warehouse route. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Edward Langford had been the target all along. Tanya continued. "I heard them talking." "Who?" "The men from the alley." "What did they say?" She looked directly at Edward. "They mentioned today's board meeting." The room became still. Very still. "They said once you disappeared, the vote would change." Edward felt something cold settle in his chest, because suddenly he understood. This wasn't about random crime. This wasn't about money alone. Someone wanted control. Control of something important. Something happening that very day. "What else did you hear?" Frank asked. Tanya closed her eyes briefly, trying to remember. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. "I heard a name." Edward's attention sharpened immediately. "What name?" Tanya looked directly at him, and when she spoke, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. "Grant Whitmore." The name landed harder than anyone expected. Edward Langford didn't move. For several long seconds, he simply stared at Tanya Carter, as if hoping he had misheard, as if wishing the answer were someone else. But Tanya's exhausted eyes never wavered. She was certain, and certainty was something Edward had learned to respect, especially from people who had nothing to gain by lying. Frank looked between them. "You know him?" Edward exhaled slowly. "Yes." The room became silent, not because anyone was surprised, but because of how he said it. The answer carried disappointment, anger, and something deeper. "Betrayal, who is he?" Malik asked. Edward looked at the boy, then toward the cold concrete floor. Grant Whitmore is one of the largest investors connected to several healthcare projects I've funded. The detectives exchanged glances. Tanya frowned. He's more than that. Edward looked up. What do you mean? He came to the hotel often. Everyone turned toward her. Tanya continued. I've seen him for months. Where? In the executive restaurant. The conference floors. The private events. She swallowed. And he remembered people. That detail surprised Edward. Remembered? Tanya nodded. He always acted friendly. Learned names. Asked questions. Talked to workers. Carl frowned. That sounds harmless. Tanya looked directly at him. No. The simple answer silenced the room. People who care about workers don't look at them the way he did. Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood exactly what she meant. Some people learned names because they respected people. Others learned names because information had value. Edward felt a chill. Suddenly, dozens of interactions resurfaced in his memory. Fundraisers, board meetings, cocktail receptions. Grant Whitmore smiling, listening, asking questions, always collecting information, always appearing helpful, always appearing reasonable. Why would he target me? Edward asked quietly. Tanya looked away. You already know. The answer hit harder than expected. Because deep down, he did. The board meeting, the hospital vote, the project, everything connected. Months earlier, Edward had announced plans to convert one of his most profitable private healthcare properties into a large-scale affordable treatment center. The proposal had divided investors. Some supported it, others hated it, especially those focused solely on profit. Grant Whitmore had been among the loudest critics. At the time, Edward assumed it was business, a disagreement, nothing more. Now he wasn't so sure. Frank's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, then immediately handed it to a detective. It's Travis. Everyone froze. The detective answered. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. But when it ended, the room felt different. What did he say? The detective looked toward Edward. He wants a deal. Nobody looked surprised. What kind of deal? He'll testify. Silence. The detective continued. He says he'll cooperate if prosecutors consider a reduced sentence. And? The detective took a breath. He confirmed Grant Whitmore's name. The room fell completely silent. Not suspicion, not theory. Confirmation. The pieces finally locked together. Edward walked toward a nearby table, sat down, and for the first time all day looked tired. Not physically, spiritually. The kind of exhaustion that arrived when someone you trusted turned into someone you never truly knew. Malik watched him carefully. Then something unexpected happened. The billionaire laughed, just once, softly, almost sadly. Everyone stared. Sir? Edward shook his head. You know what's funny? Nobody answered. He looked directly at Malik. All day I've been surrounded by security systems, bodyguards, executives, lawyers, technology. He smiled faintly. And none of them saved me. The room grew quiet. Edward's eyes settled on the 11-year-old boy. You did. Malik immediately looked uncomfortable. I just told the truth. Exactly. Edward nodded. You told the truth when nobody wanted to hear it. The words stayed with everyone, because they were true. Carl looked down. Embarrassment washed across his face. Hours earlier, he had dismissed Malik as a nuisance. A poor kid looking for attention. Now the entire investigation existed because that same child refused to walk away. Tanya wrapped an arm around her son. Pride filled her exhausted eyes. Not because he had become important, not because a billionaire was praising him, but because he had become exactly the kind of person she raised him to be. Kind, observant, brave. The room's atmosphere softened. For the first time since morning, fear no longer controlled every conversation. There was relief now. Relief that Tanya was alive. Relief that Walter Benson might still be found. Relief that the truth had begun emerging. Then Frank's phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. His expression changed before the call even ended. Hope. Real hope. What is it? Malik asked. Frank lowered the phone. His smile appeared for the first time all day. We found Walter. Everything stopped. Alive? Tanya whispered. Frank nodded. He's alive. The relief was instant, powerful, overwhelming. Tanya covered her mouth. Malik closed his eyes. Edward leaned back in his chair. The tension he had carried since morning eased slightly. What happened? He was found unconscious in his apartment. Is he okay? The doctors expect a full recovery. Nobody realized how badly they needed that news until they heard it. A good man. A kind man. A man who had spent years helping strangers without asking for recognition. Still alive. The room collectively exhaled. Tanya wiped tears from her eyes. He drove us home when buses stopped running. Frank smiled. We know. He brought groceries once when Malik was sick. We know. He never asked for anything. Silence followed. Then Edward quietly spoke. I know. Because that was the thing. The people at the center of this story had never asked for anything. Not Tanya, not Walter, not Malik. They simply helped people because helping people mattered. And somehow that simple truth had exposed an entire conspiracy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Outside, evening light began slipping across Chicago. The rain had stopped. Golden sunlight broke through clouds. The first warmth of the day. Edward stood, slowly, thoughtfully, then looked toward the window. The city stretched beyond the glass. Millions of people. Millions of stories. Most unnoticed, most unheard, and yet one child standing beside a bus stop had changed everything. The billionaire turned back toward Malik. Can I ask you something? The boy nodded. Why did you run after me this morning? Malik looked surprised. The answer seemed obvious. Because it was wrong. Edward smiled. But people told you to stay out of it. Yes. They laughed at you. Yes. You could have walked away, yes. The boy shrugged, then gave the answer that would stay with Edward Langford for the rest of his life. Mr. Benson would have helped me. Silence filled the room. Not awkward silence. The kind that follows truth. Simple truth. Powerful truth. The kind that doesn't need explanation. Because in that single sentence lived everything. Why Malik spoke up. Why Tanya followed the men. Why Walter helped strangers. Why kindness mattered. And why people willing to care were becoming increasingly rare. Edward looked away briefly, collecting himself. Then he nodded. Understanding. Finally understanding. Because the people everyone overlooked had seen what wealthy executives, expensive security systems, and entire organizations had missed. Not because they were smarter, not because they were richer, because they cared. And caring made them pay attention. Outside, the evening sun reflected against the windows of the Langford Grand. The storm was ending. But Edward Langford already knew something else had begun. And before this story was over, he intended to make sure the world remembered exactly who had saved his life. 3 months later, Chicago looked different. Summer had arrived. The gray skies of that frightening morning had given way to bright afternoons, warm sidewalks, and long evenings filled with the sounds of traffic, laughter, and neighborhood life. The investigation had unfolded exactly as Lieutenant Harris and the prosecutors promised it would. Slowly, carefully, piece by piece, Travis Cole eventually cooperated fully. Phone records, financial transfers, witness testimony, and surveillance footage connected everything. Grant Whitmore was arrested. Several business associates followed. The scheme that had nearly changed countless lives for the worse unraveled in public view. Newspapers covered the story. Television stations covered the story. Business magazines covered the story. At first, the headlines focused on Edward Langford, the billionaire who narrowly escaped a carefully planned abduction, the billionaire who exposed corruption among powerful investors, the billionaire who refused to abandon his healthcare project. But Edward hated those headlines because they weren't true, at least not completely. Every interview ended the same way. Every speech ended the same way. Every reporter eventually heard the same sentence. I am alive because an 11-year-old boy chose courage over silence. The reporters eventually stopped asking about Edward and started asking about Malik. The attention made Malik uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. He preferred books, basketball courts, helping Rosa carry supplies at St. Luke's. He didn't enjoy cameras. He certainly didn't enjoy television interviews. But his mother reminded him of something. Sometimes telling the truth helps people. So he answered questions. Carefully. Honestly. Exactly the way Tanya had raised him. And people listened. Not because he was famous. Not because he was rich. But because his story felt real. An ordinary kid. An ordinary morning. One decision. One warning. One act of courage. The story spread farther than anyone expected. Meanwhile, another transformation quietly began. The healthcare project moved forward. Despite enormous resistance, despite legal battles, despite financial pressure. Edward refused to back down. Many people wondered why. The answer was simple. Because after meeting Tanya Carter and Walter Benson and Malik, the project stopped being numbers on paper. It became personal, very personal. One afternoon in late August, dozens of people gathered on a corner in South Chicago. The neighborhood looked familiar to Malik, because he had spent years standing there, waiting for buses, waiting for rides, waiting for opportunities, waiting for life to become easier. The old bus shelter still stood beside the street. The metal roof, the worn bench, the faded transit map, the exact place where everything began. Only now something new stood beside it. A modern brick building, large windows, fresh landscaping, a bright blue sign. People filled the sidewalk, neighbors, teachers, church volunteers, city officials, hospital staff, reporters, families, children. Even Walter Benson stood near the front row, fully recovered, still arguing with anyone who tried treating him like a hero, especially Edward. You still owe me 3 months of driving, Walter had joked earlier that morning. Edward had laughed. Only if you promise to stop trying to take care of everyone, Walter smiled. That's not happening. Tanya stood beside Malik. She wore a navy blue blazer, a badge clipped neatly to the front. Operations Coordinator, Community Health Services. The title still felt strange to her. For years, she had worked multiple jobs. For years, she had counted every dollar. For years, she had worried about rent. Now she had health care, a stable salary, paid vacation, a future. Not because someone rescued her, because someone finally recognized her value. That difference mattered very much. The crowd quieted as Edward approached the microphone. He looked out across the neighborhood, across the families, across the children, across the people who rarely received invitations to important ceremonies. And then he smiled, because this was exactly where he wanted to be. Not downtown, not in a boardroom, not at a gala. Here. He adjusted the microphone. The crowd settled. I've spent most of my life giving speeches. A few people laughed. Edward smiled, but this is the only one that actually matters. Silence followed. The good kind. The listening kind. He looked toward Malik. The boy immediately became nervous. The crowd noticed and smiled. Edward continued. 3 months ago, I almost made the worst mistake of my life. The audience grew still. I trusted what looked familiar. He paused. I trusted appearances. His eyes drifted toward Tanya, then Walter, then Malik, and I ignored the most important truth. Nobody moved. The people closest to the ground often see things the rest of us miss. The words settled gently across the crowd. Edward wasn't talking about wealth, or status, or power. He was talking about humanity, about paying attention, about caring. The person who saved my life wasn't a security expert. A few people smiled. He wasn't a lawyer. More smiles. He wasn't a politician. Laughter. Edward pointed toward Malik. He was an 11-year-old boy standing at a bus stop. The crowd erupted into applause. Malik immediately looked down, embarrassed. Exactly as expected. Tanya squeezed his shoulder. Walter grinned. Rosa wiped away tears. Edward waited for the applause to fade. Then he continued. This clinic exists because healthcare should belong to everyone. The crowd applauded again. But this building also exists for another reason. He turned toward the large sign covered by a blue cloth. A city official stepped forward. The cloth dropped. The sign beneath it gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. The Carter Benson Community Clinic. Built for the people who notice, care, and speak up. The crowd fell silent. Then louder applause erupted, even louder than before. Tanya covered her mouth. Walter stared, completely speechless. A rare achievement. Malik looked at the sign, then at his mother, then at Walter. His chest felt warm, because their names were there, not because they were wealthy, not because they were powerful, because they were good. Edward stepped away from the microphone, then unexpectedly returned. One more thing. The crowd quieted. He smiled toward Malik. This is not charity. The words echoed across the gathering. A few reporters immediately started writing. Edward continued. This young man earned every opportunity he receives. He gestured toward Malik. He saved a life. He protected people. He spoke when everyone else stayed silent. His voice softened. And he did it because his mother taught him to care. Tanya lowered her eyes. Emotion filled her face. The crowd applauded once more. But this time something felt different. The applause wasn't for money, or power, or success. It was for character, for kindness, for courage, for people who did the right thing when nobody was watching. Later that evening, after the speeches ended and reporters packed up their equipment, Malik sat alone at the bus stop. The same bus stop, the same bench, the same street. The city hummed softly around him. Summer sunlight stretched across the pavement. For a while he simply sat there, thinking, remembering. Then someone sat beside him. Edward. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable. Eventually, Edward smiled. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Malik shook his head. "What?" Edward looked toward the street. "The fact that you almost didn't say anything." Malik laughed softly. "I almost didn't." "But you did." "Yeah." The boy looked toward the clinic, toward his mother talking with Rosa, toward Walter telling another story nobody asked for, toward the people walking through the clinic doors. Then he shrugged. It just felt wrong. Edward smiled. The exact same answer. The same simple truth. Months later, it still carried power. It felt wrong. Nothing more complicated than that. Finally, Edward stood. "So what are you going to do next?" Malik thought for a moment, then grinned. "I'm going to school." Edward laughed. "Good answer." As the sun began sinking behind the city skyline, the two walked back toward the clinic together. A billionaire, an 11-year-old boy. Two people from completely different worlds, connected forever by one ordinary morning. One warning, one act of courage, and one simple lesson that neither would ever forget. The smallest voices are often the ones telling the truth. And sometimes, the people the world overlooks are the very people who change it. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. And I'd love to ask you something. If you believe kindness still matters in today's world, type a simple one in the comments. And if you believe more people should speak up when something feels wrong, type a 0. I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to know where you stand. Also, if you enjoyed this story and want more powerful, heartwarming stories about courage, kindness, second chances, and life-changing moments, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next story that could stay with you long after the video ends. Thank you for spending this time with us. Take care of yourself, take care of others, and remember, one small act of courage can change a life. Sometimes, it can change many. See you in the next story.